Let me pray and we can have a look at Ruth chapter 3. Heavenly Father, thank you for the things that we've been seeing about your character in the book of Ruth, your providential care and your kindness and the way that you use individuals as a part of your big plan to show kindness and to bring about your perfect purposes. Help us now as we look at a chapter that raises all kinds of questions. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Before we dive into Ruth chapter 3, I should just say, in a normal sermon or a Bible study, I wouldn't bring out all of these kinds of diagrams or so many cross-references. Don't have so many cross-references in a Bible study. But the reason is because we're just trying to have a deeper dive into some of the context and to see some of the things about Moab a little bit more clearly, and also to think a little bit more carefully about moving from them back then to us. So that's why we've paused and thought about some of these things in a slightly more systematic way. But I wouldn't advise drawing these pictures in a Bible study or in a sermon or something like that. Don't have so many cross-references in a Bible study. If you decide to do Bible studies in Ruth, that would be a really bad idea. Great. Okay, now we're coming up to Ruth chapter 3. And what we've been seeing so far is that God has got his eye on the big picture, but he's also got his providential eye on the small details, that he's mapping everything out according to these perfect purposes of his, that he's given his providential or his protective word. As we follow his word, we become agents of his kindness and of his grace. So God uses people to achieve his purposes. But we might have a bit of a question about the way in which these people are used, because these people who are being used by God are flawed people, and sometimes we might think, well, are they in fact acting in a way which is wise, or are they in fact acting in a way which is moral? And again, it's not very hard for us to think about some specific questions like that. Christians will disagree about a range of different things. So, for instance, what's the kind thing to do? Is homeschooling a kind thing for Christian parents to do? Yes or no? Or is serving in the army? Is serving in the army a good thing for Christians to do? Yes or no? Or watching certain shows on television. Should we watch TV or should we not watch TV? There's going to be a spectrum of different views. People saying, yes, this is kind. Yes, this is wise. Yes, this is a good thing to do, or this is a bad thing to do. So how can we evaluate, or how should we evaluate, when Christians who we expect to be God's agents of kindness are doing things in a way that just raise a few questions for us? Now, as we come to Ruth chapter 3, I think that we see some of that, because something really good happens in Ruth chapter 3, which is that Boaz and Ruth get together. But the way in which that happens actually raises quite a few questions for us. And I think it's just good for us to get that out in the open right from the beginning. So what I'm going to do is read through Ruth chapter 3, and then we'll just start with the exercise of listing some of the potentially problematic things in Ruth chapter 3. And as you can see, I've arranged it on the page there in another one of these sort of mirror things, where the bit right at the center is that big truth that Boaz states about her and what he's going to do. So it's sort of similar to the structure of Ruth chapter 3. But let's read it through. And as we read it through, just keep your eyes peeled for anything that you think, well, that just raises a question or two. So Ruth chapter 3. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you, where you will be well provided for. Now Boaz, with whose woman you've worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know that you're there until he's finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he's lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You've not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I'll do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, let him redeem you. But if he's not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning. But he got up before anyone could be recognized, and he said, "No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl that you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, she poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything that Boaz had done for her and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." So turn to the person next to you. Just think about some of these things that could be problematic in this passage, and then we'll all together get some of those up on the board. Okay, we'll come back together there, and we'll just do this all at once, all together. So just feel free to shout out or put up your hand. Anything that you think is a potential issue in chapter 3, things that we've got questions about.
At the start, it seems like she's doing it sort of in her own wisdom and her own planning. So I must find a home for you. There's no reference to God, and I think that's sort of, you see that in the rest of her method is all sort of human methodology. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Other questions we have? Yes.
Seems like the way that actually goes ahead, the whole threshing floor, lying on feet and everything, they're wanting to be quite careful about it because people are likely to get the wrong idea about what's happened there.
Right, okay, so some people would say they're being careful and other people would say they're not being careful enough. But you're right, I think there's a possibility of people getting the wrong idea here, yes. Yes, yeah.
Are they targeting Boaz when he's had something to drink as well?
Right, yeah. That's right.
In fact, they don't want to be seen. He says, "Oh, because a woman shouldn't have been seen here." So obviously, society would expect that women wouldn't be in such a place, and yet her mother-in-law sends her, and he doesn't send her away.
Like the combination of night, putting on perfume, drink, it's all quite suggestive, and you kind of question, why does it need to be done like this?
It's a kind of feeling that Boaz being tricked. I don't know.
Is this a conniving,
Yeah.
manipulative plan? Yeah.
And it turns out like chanting the wrong one, like there's someone else who's actually closer to them in relationship.
Right, okay, and there's another man, yeah. Turns into a love triangle. Right.
I'm guessing with our modern society's glasses on, it'd be like talking about kind of trying to find the person who's most closely related to get married to would seem a bit strange, wouldn't it?
Yes. Yes, although it's not. Yes, you're right. Okay, so. Okay, yeah, so in this case, she's not closely related to him in terms of DNA, but yes. Okay, so we've got some questions up here. I must find, it seems to be Naomi's plan, a possibility of people getting the wrong idea, targeting Boaz after he's had something to drink, a sense of not meeting societal expectations. Nobody must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. He doesn't send her away in the middle of the night. Is he being tricked? There's another man marrying someone close. Any other things people want to put up there? Well, that's enough to get started with, at least, isn't it? So all we're doing is acknowledging that, well, something really good happens in this chapter, which is Boaz and Ruth get together, but the way that it happens does raise a few questions, and we can be honest about that. We don't need to pretend that these things don't happen in the chapter. These things do happen in the chapter, and so we're just trying to work out how it all fits together. So we start with Naomi's, I've called it here, Naomi's canny plan, maybe crazy plan, crackpot plan, manipulative plan. There are all kinds of ways in which we could describe this plan. But the thing that we need to see, that perhaps we don't immediately see with our New Testament glasses on, is that she is trying to find Ruth a home, and the particular thing to see is with a guardian redeemer. So we've seen that in chapter 2 mentioned, that man is our close relative, one of our guardian redeemers. So Naomi really brightens up when she discovers he's one of our guardian redeemers. And then over here, she's directing Ruth towards this guardian redeemer. So what exactly is a guardian redeemer? This is very important for understanding the story. So we're going to explore that a little bit, and I've given you some references to look up what a guardian redeemer is and some of the jobs that they have. So have a look at that with the person next to you. You've got a few minutes to explore it. Okay, we'll come back together there. And how about on this table over here? You guys willing to start us off? Something about guardian redeemers. How did the guardian redeemer help to look after widows and families?
They continue the family line to having children with the widow to continue their brother's line or father's line.
Yeah, that's right. And did you guys have a look at Numbers 35 at all? I think it was Numbers 35, actually, yeah. Although I'm sure Numbers 36 is very good as well.
That's a bit more about inheritance and marrying.
Right, yeah.
I'm sure you're right.
Right, they're not all, but Numbers 35 is about an avenger. So these guardian redeemers were also sometimes family avengers. If somebody was murdered or there's manslaughter, then the guardian redeemer is the person who goes and sorts this out. So I guess they're like the friendly uncles in the family. If anything bad happens, then they basically go and sort that out and look after the family affairs, look after the family property. If there are any widows in the family, then they need to look after those widows in the family, and that might mean sort of caring for them by providing for them, also making sure that they can have children to continue the line of their brother. So they just generally are looking after the family, and this is a particular way that they look after the family. And we see that during the time of Jesus, this is still something that people did, and they asked that rather interesting hypothetical question about all of these brothers who sequentially die, and then here is the lady married to. Yes, just some questions. Go on.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What are they set aside, or are they're the kinsman redeemer until they are married? Like, what do they have to remain single, or is it just if there is a single person in the family, they then take on that role?
Yeah, good question. So we're not given all of the specifics about exactly how it happens, and probably there's quite a lot of variation and local customs and the different clans doing it slightly differently. It doesn't seem like they stayed single. So it could well be that a married man is acting as a kinsman redeemer to look after his brother's wife. He has his own family, but he also looks after his brother's family and his brother's wife. And that is just the way that it was done. And again, it seems very strange to us. But if you're a widow with absolutely nothing in ancient Israel, which is like a Wild West, you'd be grateful for for this uncle to look after you rather than to just go it alone. So it seems very strange to us, but if you're poor and destitute, then this is a common thing and there's a provision in the law. Any other questions about these guardian redeemers and the role that they did? So it's important that we understand that, otherwise the book of Ruth doesn't make a huge amount of sense. So Boaz is one of these guardian redeemers, one of these uncles who is quite close. He's in the same clan, and he, together with some of the others, are meant to be looking out for those who are in need, like Naomi and like Ruth. And so Ruth is directed by Naomi. Naomi says he's one of our guardian redeemers. That's Ruth chapter 2, verse 20. So there's some of these other guys as well. But then she comes up with this plan, and there's all the things that we listed that we might have questions about. I've got some of these questions put on the page here as well. She says, wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. So kind of dress for success. Perhaps Ruth had been working all day in the field and had got rather sweaty and she needed a bath, but there's a slightly manipulative overtones where she dolls herself up and puts on perfume and goes to find him after he's been drinking. And then, as we noticed before, well, we might think that the threshing floor is just like the local gathering centre, a bit like going to the pub. But actually, that isn't how they seem to think about it. Boaz says no one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. That seems rather problematic. And then she's told by her mother-in-law to uncover his feet. And uncovering his feet is just a curious phrase that has raised questions for a number of commentators. And the reason is because in Hebrew, sometimes, not always, but sometimes feet is kind of euphemistic for genitals. So, for instance, in 1 Samuel chapter 24, Saul goes into a cave to relieve himself, and the Hebrew is literally to cover his feet. Presumably he's crouching and his feet are covered with his tunic. So it's a different phrase, covering feet to uncovering feet, but it's enough of a similarity for people to ask the question, what is really meant when Naomi says uncover his feet? It seems like a slightly curious way to phrase it. And then also Ruth saying, well, I will do whatever you say. She's the epitome of loyalty. But is she here actually a little bit too loyal? And maybe she should be asking a few more questions about what is going on. So as we come across Naomi's plan, great that she wants to move towards this kinsman redeemer, but it does make us ask some questions. Now, I don't think there's an easy way to resolve this. Some people would say, oh, this is definitely completely sinful. And other commentators would say, well, so you've got different people weighing things up on different lines. But I think one interesting place to look is the story of Tamar. You see, in Ruth chapter 4, verse 12, the women pray and ask that Ruth might become like Tamar. And it seems like a very curious throwaway line because Tamar is one of those shady ladies in the Old Testament. But when we examine the story of Tamar, it's also a story with a kind of kinsman redeemer figure, and something very unusual happened. So I'd like you to do that now. I put the whole chapter there. You probably don't need to read the whole thing, but why don't you just silently skim it, especially the first half, and then answer that question. Given what Tamar did, how is this a compliment in Ruth chapter 4? And how does this help us to understand something about Naomi's plan in Ruth chapter 3? That link to Tamar. I won't pick on anyone for this, but does anyone want to hazard a guess with the story of Tamar of how this might help us to appreciate, understand what's going on in Ruth? Yeah.
Well, I think Genesis 38 is like the unredeemed foreshadowing of the book of Ruth, where the way that Judah reacts to what Tamar did initially is really terrible, and the way that he just in general acts completely unrighteously and unfairly to her, and doesn't give her his third son like he promised. Whereas in contrast, Boaz at every stage acts correctly. He really puts no foot wrong the whole way. And so it's kind of like the women are kind of saying, may your house be like Perez, where he was to breach the breakthrough, maybe. May your house break through like Tamar's did. In other words, may you receive that honor from the place of dishonor that Tamar did eventually when Judah had his hand forced.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Does anyone else want to add to that? Yes.
It seems sort of like the idea in both stories you have of the woman taking the initiative, because, it's not explicit in Ruth, but the kinsman redeemers are not doing proactively what they should be doing. And through slightly, possibly immoral means, again, slightly different, God does actually provide the son or the lineage.
Yes, exactly. So in both stories, the story of a kinsman redeemer who isn't stepping up yet. Obviously for Tamar, it took a long time and Judah was doing nothing. Here it hasn't been such a long time, but the kinsman redeemers are not doing their job. And so in both stories, the woman steps up and takes initiative to receive what is lawfully hers. So it's lawful that the kinsman redeemer should help the woman, and so she wants something that's lawful and good and God-given. Now, in both stories, we've got questions about the means, but we might look beyond the means to the overall aim. And it seems very much in Ruth chapter 4 that Tamar is seen as a good woman because she's upheld the family line of Judah, which is the kingly line. So that's very important. She's achieved something that's important for the history books, for the nation, and for her family. We've got questions about the way that she did it. So too for Naomi, she wants to secure her family line, and that actually is a good thing and a kind thing. And it's in the law books that she should be able to have a kinsman redeemer to look after her and to look after Ruth. We've got questions about the way that she does it, but I think we can look beyond some of the details to see her motivation. And then moving to us, I think we can also say, well, the good thing that we can learn from Naomi is that she is absolutely confident that she needs a redeemer, and we too need to be confident and sure we need a redeemer and to move towards the redeemer. That's a lesson that we can learn. And also, I think proactively, when others are not playing their part, that sometimes we need to be proactive to show kindness to others. Obviously, the way that Naomi tries to show kindness and to take proactive steps, we've got questions about. But there can be really positive ways in which we take proactive steps when others are not playing their part. So that's a lesson to learn, I think. Naomi's canny plan, Naomi's crazy plan, we've got questions about that, but at least she's moving towards the kinsman redeemer. That is a good thing. Next, we've got Ruth's bold proposal. She's absolutely loyal. She doesn't fully understand all of the Israelite laws and customs. She's very reliant on her mother-in-law. So she just says, look, I'll do whatever you tell me to do. And so you can almost picture her creeping up to the threshing floor, looking from a distance as Boaz is finishing having his meal and his last drink. As he climbs into his sleeping bag, she looks from a distance, where is that? Make sure I get the right one, kind of thing. And then when it looks like everyone has gone to sleep, she creeps up and uncovers his feet as she's been told to do. And then eventually, in the middle of the night, when he wakes up, she delivers the line that we find in verse 8 and 9. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. Who are you? He asked. I am your servant Ruth, she said. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family. So for the Hebrew there, it's literally wing. And it's quite a interesting image. So again, I think it's worth us just pausing on the wing language and chasing up a few other references. So there's one in Psalm 91, there's one in Ezekiel 16. Just have a look at those and compare that with Ruth chapter 2. You saw wing language there, and Ruth chapter 3 wing language. So how does the wing imagery work? What's going on? I think we were up to this table over here. Did you guys get a chance to look at the wing language? Have you guys answered the question already? Yeah. Do you want to say something about wings?
Yeah, I guess we're just saying how, like, based on some of the other verses, like there's kind of that picture of them coming to their covenant relationship, and I guess the imagery of being like the shelter and protection.
Yes, exactly. So Psalm 91, coming under the wings of God's protection and shelter, and Ezekiel 16 has the love element as well, where you see this covenant relationship between God and his people. There's shelter, but there's also closeness, and there's also intimacy as well, and there's love. And so there's all of these elements combined together. When she says spread the corner of your wings, or spread your wings of your garment over me, it's reflecting back to Ruth chapter 2, where she's taken refuge in God. And now the particular way in which she's finding refuge is in the Redeemer. And this Redeemer is going to look after her. And also there's the sense of intimacy and closeness. So that is what Ruth says. Spread the corner of your wings over me, since you are a guardian of our family. And the way that Boaz responds is very significant, and it's quite interesting and helpful for unpicking what's going on in the story. So listen to what he says. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness, again, that same hesed word, is greater than that which you showed earlier. You've not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor, and now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble, that's worthy character. So it's interesting here that this is described as an act of kindness. See, if a Moabite woman creeps up to you in the middle of the night, the initial thing that an Israelite might think is, oh yes, of course, this is what Moabites do. They are seductresses, they are femme fatales. So we may be tempted to interpret it like that. But Boaz's words really help us. He says this is an act of kindness. Kindness because she's paying attention to him, but more than that, kindness to the family line of Elimelech and to Naomi. You see what he says? The kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. So the kindness she showed earlier was loyalty to Naomi, working hard for Naomi, helping to provide for the family of Elimelech, sticking close to the clan. That's the kindness that he's talking about, kindness to Naomi. And so he's saying this is in effect a kindness to Naomi. Now, why is it a kindness to Naomi? Because she, it seems, has got other options. That people have noticed that she's a worthy woman, that she's something of a good catch, and that she potentially would have had opportunities with other men. He says here, you've not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. So it seems like Ruth may, in Boaz's mind, have had opportunities to secure other marriages or other people to look after her, but she's doing this out of sacrifice for the family because he's the kinsman redeemer, and she's putting Naomi and the family first. And so he says, everyone knows that you are a worthy woman. So this bit, structurally right at the center of Ruth chapter 3, should cement Ruth's character and help us to be confident that she is a worthy woman. So even though there are problematic elements within the story, at the center of the story, structurally, is something that says that Ruth is worthy. So we just need to weigh that up with the things that we think are less good or that we've got questions about. She comes across as someone who is worthy. Now, what can we take from what Ruth does by way of application, well, we also need to take refuge under the Redeemer's wings. This is just a beautiful picture of Christ and the church in a way, that we are very much like Naomi. We are the outsiders, we're the Gentiles, we're the undeserving Moabite types. But we can seek refuge and we can seek closeness individually and as a church under the wings of a Redeemer who is Jesus. Jesus, who's the perfect, trustworthy Redeemer who pays a great price. So what we see here is very much Christological and shows us the relationship between Christ and the church. That's a wonderful thing. And that, in a way, is the biggest theme here. There also is a theme of kindness. And I think Ruth's part, if Naomi's part is proactive kindness, Ruth's part seems to be sacrificial kindness. Now, of course, she gets together with Boaz, who is a really good guy, so things work out for her very well in the end. But she is thinking about other people first as she's going through this whole journey. She's not just thinking, oh, what I want. She's thinking, what's best for the family? What's best for Naomi? And so too for us, in all of the decisions that we make, sacrificial kindness. We can take a leaf out of Ruth's page over here. So sacrificial kindness, that's an application. Sometimes people ask, is there an application on dating in Ruth chapter 3? I don't know what you think about that. I have heard a sermon by a very well-known evangelical, and dating was a very strong line of application when he was teaching Ruth chapter 3. I probably wouldn't say it's the main line of application, but maybe there's something that can be drawn from it. I don't know. The girls don't always have to wait for guys, something like that. It's fine to be a little bit proactive. I think we probably wouldn't want to lean too heavily on those lines of application, because that's not the reason why it's been written in the first place. It's always good for us to ask that question, what's the author's intent? The author's intent when Samuel wrote this with Samuel wasn't primarily to give us dating advice in the 21st century. So if we are gleaning sort of little things from it on that, that's not the main line of application. But what we see here is Ruth's bold proposal, a wonderful picture of what redemption is all about, drawing near to God in faith, sacrificial kindness. Then we also see Boaz's very trustworthy promise. Now this is the point in the story where the clangor is dropped, the thing that we weren't expecting. We were expecting them to actually get together now. Here we see them come together, but the problem is introduced. This is the twist in the tale. And he says, although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there's another who's more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning. Well, here we see that Boaz is seeking to do the right thing as the guardian redeemer. Now, again, people have questions about this. People might say, well, surely if a young woman creeps up to you in the middle of the night, you say, go home. You don't say, stay at my feet. And so we might have questions about whether he should have done that. But in other ways, it seems like he is trying to do the right thing. He says, there's another guardian redeemer. We need to speak to him first. And he also aims to be above reproach. He doesn't want there to be sort of any scandal attached to Ruth. And so he sends her away early. He's very generous. He gives her a huge bag. So when she walks home, it's going to look like she's just been out working together with other people. So he's trying to do the right thing at every stage. We might have questions about what he's, about the exact way that he does it. But overall, it seems that Boaz's part here is someone who's of good character. Throughout the story, Samuel is showing us that Boaz and Ruth are both people of good character. And when Ruth gets home, she relays the whole story to Naomi, and Naomi says, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. So what we see here is a picture of a trustworthy Redeemer, and Jesus, of course, is our perfect trustworthy Redeemer. Boaz is an example, but Jesus is the true fulfillment. We can always trust in him and his perfect promises. And we also see, I think, a layer of application by way of kindness. If Naomi's kindness is proactive kindness, and if Ruth's kindness is sacrificial kindness, then what we see with Boaz's kindness is a sort of dutiful kindness. He's going to follow through on his word. He's going to do it all as quickly as he can. He can be relied upon. And so too, we should be people, as we seek to show kindness, who can be relied upon, who will keep their word, who will be dutiful as we go about our work. So let's just pause to think about this diagram again. I'd love you to try and remember this diagram after the end of today, if you haven't come across it. So in the story, we come across the guardian redeemers, and we see for them back then, it was very important to have a guardian redeemer to protect those who were in need, these destitute women. Seems very strange for us today, but it was very important for them back then. So that's the reason why those laws existed. For them back then, they needed guardian redeemers. As we understand this in the narrative of the Bible, obviously it points to Jesus. Jesus is the true guardian redeemer, and we need to seek refuge in him. So the guardian redeemer thread through the Bible points us to the Lord Jesus Christ. And this chapter, Ruth chapter 3, shows us that wonderfully in a way that no other part of the Bible shows us in quite the same fashion. But at the same time, I think Ruth chapter 3 also helps us to understand how God shows kindness in a world that's fallen and using flawed people. Remember at the beginning, we got our list of all of the questions of things that we're not totally sure about for chapter 3. Some of these, I think, we've started to resolve, and some of them haven't entirely gone away completely. But I think what Ruth chapter 3 helps us to do is to look beyond some of the details of things that we don't like that other believers are doing. We can look beyond some of the exact things that Ruth and Naomi and Boaz do that raise questions to us, and we can go, well, at least they are people of faith, and at least their motivation in the end is to do the right thing, is to get Ruth and Boaz together and to protect the family line of Elimelech and to look after Naomi. So that the motivation in the end and the faith is absolutely there. But I think that's helpful for us in a sense as we try to evaluate what other believers are doing. We sometimes might have questions about what they do. We can look past some of those things. We can look past some of those things and know that God is using believers, flawed as they are, even if they do things that we think are unwise or even morally dubious, to achieve his perfect purposes, and that God has this much bigger plan of a Redeemer, the Lord Jesus Christ, and that is absolutely unstoppable. So that's what we see in Ruth chapter 3. And as we reach the end, I'd love us to think about some of the ways in which it might look like for us to show kindness in a similar fashion to Naomi and to Ruth and to Boaz. So how can we show kindness, take bold, God-glorifying action, which is selfless and trustworthy, in contexts like evangelism, relationships, godliness, giving? So this is like a secondary line of application. If I was teaching this, I'd go really big on redemption and the cross. But I think there's also a line of application which is following their example of kindness. And so I'd love us to think about that. So turn to the person next to you and do the discussion question in the box over there for a few minutes. Great. Let's come back together there. And how about that table at the back? Is there anyone there who wants to feedback on any of the things you were talking about?
Well, we were reflecting on like how we can have quite selfish reasons even for godliness, and kind of like what that looks like and how it is actually it means be living quite distinctly to be acting in like a way to glorify God. I'm just talking about that in relationships.
Very helpful, thanks. And the other half of that table, did you have anything to feedback on that section? Just give us a glimpse of what you're talking about.
We were talking about evangelism.
Yeah.
Just saying how that it's easy to relate to people who we think, oh, we're going to get on well with. And there are other people who we're concerned for, but we just think, oh, that's impossible, you know, God can't work there. But that he can. So that's what we were talking about.
Yeah, very helpful. And I think that's an example where sometimes we need to proactively take the initiative, and it may involve a level of self-sacrifice in order to show God's kindness to others. And that might be refused, but also it might be used by God to achieve something wonderful in someone else's life. So kindness sometimes means being really proactive, sometimes means being really sacrificial, it sometimes means being really reliable. And as a background themes, we see that, I think, here in this chapter in some really interesting ways.